Welcome to our deep dive today. We're taking a look at excerpts from the Summa Theologica by Thomas Aquinas.
Oh, Aquinas.
Yeah,
Heavy stuff.
it's pretty dense, but I mean, it's fascinating. We're talking medieval philosophy and theology.
Yeah, some really big questions that people have been grappling with for centuries.
And the way it's structured is so interesting, with the questions, the articles, objections, and then replies.
Yeah, it's really a reflection of that whole scholastic method, that rigorous debate, the logic.
Yeah.
We're not going to follow that structure exactly today,
Right.
but we're going to try to really dig into the essence of Aquinas' thought.
Yeah, so one of the first things that I notice in these excerpts is how Aquinas tackles this question of God's existence. And he has these 5 ways
Right, the 5 way.
to demonstrate God's existence. But then he makes this point that even though we can reason our way to God,
Yeah.
we can't ever fully grasp God's essence.
It's true. You can see the effects of God in creation, but the full reality of what God is,
Mhm.
that remains a mystery.
It's like we're trying to look at the ocean, but all we have is this one little drop of water,
Mm-mm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
We get a glimpse, but there's so much more.
There's a depth there that we can't fully comprehend.
So how does Aquinas approach this? How does he approach understanding God if we can never really know his essence?
He focuses on God's attributes,
Okay.
describing God as simple. And that doesn't mean simplistic.
Right.
It means that God isn't made up of parts. God's a unified whole.
Okay.
He's infinite, not limited by time or space,
Mhm.
immutable,
Mm.
unchanging, and of course, perfectly good.
And he's the first cause, right?
Yes, the ultimate source of everything.
But then this is where I feel like Aquinas gets really mind-bending. He
Yeah.
says that God's essence is his existence.
That's a tough one to wrap your head around.
It is?
I mean, think about it. With everything in our experience, there's a difference between what something is and the fact that it exists.
Yeah.
Like a tree. A tree has an essence of treeness, and it exists.
Okay.
But for God, there's no distinction. His very nature is to be.
So for us, existence is like an accident.
Mm-hmm.
We could be or we could not be.
Right, right.
But for God,
It's essential.
it's essential. Yeah. So God can't not exist.
It changes our whole perspective on creation,
Yeah.
God's relationship to the universe.
Yeah. And if God has this perfect plan, what Aquinas calls divine providence,
Right.
how does that work with human free will? I mean, those seem contradictory.
A lot of people think so. If
Yeah.
God knows everything past, present, and future,
Yeah.
doesn't that mean we're just puppets on a string?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Well, Aquinas says no.
Okay.
God's knowledge of the future doesn't take away our free will. It's more like God sees this whole tapestry of time all at once,
Okay.
including all the choices that we will make.
So we're not being forced to make those choices.
No.
God sees them, but we're still the ones making them freely.
I'm trying tough concepts.
Yeah. Can you give me an example, like how it...
Right. Think about a novelist writing a book. The author knows how the story's going to end,
Yeah.
right? And they know all the choices their characters are going to make.
Yeah.
But the characters are still acting freely within that world the author created.
Right.
And their choices are still meaningful, even though the author knows what they're going to be.
So it's like God's kind of setting the stage, setting the scene,
Mm-hmm.
but we're the actors making the choices, driving the plot.
That's a great way to think about it.
But that brings up another question. If God is all good and all powerful, why even allow for the possibility of bad choices?
That's a question that Aquinas grapples with too. But before we go there, I think we need to take a look at another idea that he explores,
Okay.
and that is the Trinity.
Yeah. The Father, Son, Holy Spirit, one God, 3 persons. That one's always been.
A mind blower.
Yeah. Like, how does that even work?
It's a profound mystery.
Yeah.
But Aquinas tries to make it a little more understandable
Okay.
by explaining those relationships within the Trinity.
Okay.
So the Son,
Mhm.
also known as the Word, proceeds from the Father's intellect.
Like when we speak,
Yeah.
a word comes from our mind,
Exactly.
but it's also distinct from our mind.
It's a good analogy. And then the Holy Spirit,
Mm.
representing love,
Okay.
proceeds from both the Father and the Son.
So it's the love that flows between them.
Yes, binding them together in perfect unity.
Okay, so there's this whole dynamic within the Trinity itself,
Mm-hmm.
this eternal exchange of knowledge and love. And then Aquinas takes it a step further with this idea of notional acts.
Right. It's almost like saying the Trinity has its own inner life,
Whoa.
an eternal conversation
That's wild.
happening within itself even before creation came into being. Imagine the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit just engaged in this perfect exchange of love and knowledge within their own being.
It's like another level of reality that we can't even fathom.
And that brings us to something a bit more graspable.
Okay.
The creation of angels and the material world.
All right, let's talk angels. What's their role in all of this?
Well, they seem to be pretty important in Aquinas' view of the cosmos.
Yeah.
He describes angels as created intellectual substances. They're pure intellect,
Yeah.
not like us.
Right, because we have a body and soul,
Or composite.
so they're superior in that way.
In a sense, yes.
Yes.
Not limited by a physical body.
And Aquinas goes into detail about how they even know things.
Yeah.
They don't know by their own essence like God.
Right. It's through these species.
Yeah, the species is kind of a blueprint or an imprint of a thing.
So to know a tree, an angel would receive the species of treeness?
Exactly.
Okay, so it gives them this direct understanding,
But it's still received knowledge.
unlike God,
Right.
whose knowledge is just...
A complete in itself.
Yeah.
Part of his essence.
So they still need something external to themselves to understand.
To a certain extent, yes.
Okay.
And here's another interesting thing that Aquinas mentions. He says that angels can be in multiple places at once.
Hold on, how does that work?
Well, they don't have bodies.
So they're not limited by physical space the way we are.
So how can they be in multiple places?
Well, he says it's because they can apply their intellectual power to different locations.
Like how our minds can focus on multiple thoughts at once?
Kind of like that, yeah.
Okay, so angels are these powerful intellectual beings, not constrained by space and time as we know it.
Right.
But what about creation itself? Did Aquinas believe it had a beginning, or was it eternal?
Aquinas was definitely on the side of creation having a beginning.
Okay.
He argued against the idea of an eternal universe.
So for him, the universe didn't just pop into existence out of nowhere.
Right.
There had to be a first cause.
Had to be a creator.
And that creator started by creating the Empyrean heaven.
Yes.
What's that?
The Empyrean heaven, well, Aquinas describes it as the highest and most perfect heaven,
Okay.
created first. And it's filled with this pure, radiant light.
So not like a physical place.
It's more of a spiritual realm,
Okay.
embodying the perfection of God's creation.
That's beautiful.
But now let's bring things back down to earth a bit.
Okay.
Talk about Aquinas' views on human nature. Where do we fit into all of this?
Yeah, good question. We're not pure intellect like the angels. We're definitely not the first cause.
No.
So where do we stand?
Well, according to Aquinas, humans occupy a unique position.
Okay.
We stand at this crossroads of the material and the immaterial.
So we're kind of a blend of both.
Exactly. Because we are composite of body and soul.
So let's unpack that a little bit. What did Aquinas actually mean by soul?
For Aquinas, the soul is the form of the body.
Okay.
Gives the body life and structure.
Mm-hmm.
But he also says that the soul is immaterial
Okay.
and subsistent,
Subsistent.
meaning it can exist independently of the body.
So our souls aren't just physical things that die when our bodies die.
Right.
There's something more.
Aquinas believes that the human soul can survive the death of the body.
Which opens the door to the afterlife, resurrection.
That's right.
That's a big deal.
It really changes how we think about what it means to be human.
It does, yeah. Our physical bodies are mortal, but there's a part of us that's eternal.
It's a profound idea.
Yeah.
And Aquinas even makes another distinction. He says our intellect, our capacity for understanding,
Mm-hmm.
is even more immaterial than the soul.
Wait, but I thought the soul was immaterial.
It is, but it's about levels of being, in a way. The soul is immaterial because it's not physical matter,
You're right.
but it's still the form of the body.
Okay.
But the intellect
Yeah.
isn't tied to the body in the same way.
Okay.
It's what allows us to grasp those universal concepts, to understand truths that go beyond our physical senses.
So unlike animals, we can think about justice, truth, beauty.
Exactly.
We can contemplate God, the meaning of existence.
That's part of what makes us an imago Dei.
In the image of God.
Right.
But that capacity for intellectual understanding also comes with responsibility.
It does. And that brings us to the topics of free will, morality, and virtue. Things we'll explore after a quick break. Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about that crossroads where we humans stand between the material and the immaterial, that blend of body and soul.
And how it plays into our capacity for both good and evil.
Exactly. Aquinas is really clear that humans have free will,
Wow.
that capacity to choose between good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't shy away from that tension.
But going back to the question I raised earlier, if God knows the choices we're going to make,
Yeah.
how can we be held responsible for them?
Well, Aquinas would say it's precisely because we have that free will
Okay.
that we're responsible. God's knowledge doesn't negate the choice, it encompasses it.
Okay.
It's like, remember the analogy we used with the
Yeah.
novelist?
Yeah.
The novelist knows how the characters are going to act,
Right.
but that doesn't make the characters' actions any less meaningful.
Okay. But this whole question of evil still feels kind of sticky to me.
Sure.
If God is all-powerful and all good,
Yeah.
why would he allow evil to exist at all?
Yeah, that's one of the big ones, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, Aquinas' approach is really interesting here. He doesn't see evil as a force equal and opposite to God.
Okay.
He says evil is a privation of good.
Privation. So you're saying evil's not really a thing in itself,
Right.
but an absence of something?
Exactly. Like darkness. Darkness isn't an entity, it's just the absence of light.
Okay.
So evil is kind of a lack, a distortion, a corruption of what is good.
Like a parasite
Mm.
feeding off the good and twisting it into something bad.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
But of course, it still doesn't completely explain why God would allow it.
Right.
Well, Aquinas would say God allows evil to exist because it ultimately serves a greater good.
So even our bad choices, our capacity for sin, somehow fits into this bigger plan.
It's all part of the picture.
Mm-hmm.
He sees our potential for doing wrong as part of what makes us human.
Right, the free will thing.
Exactly. We have this amazing capacity for good,
Yeah.
but also the ability to fall short.
So it's that tension that gives our choices real weight.
Exactly.
Makes things more complicated, though.
It does. So if we have this tendency toward evil,
Yeah.
how do we combat it? How do we steer ourselves toward what's good?
Right, because we know we're not always great at that.
Well, this is where Aquinas' idea of virtue is really key. He sees it as the key to living a good life,
Okay.
a life in accordance with God's will. And he distinguishes between two main types,
Okay.
moral virtues and intellectual virtue.
So moral virtues, doing the right thing. Intellectual virtues, thinking clearly.
You got it.
So you need both.
You need both.
You can't just be book smart.
No?
You have to actually live it out, make good choices.
Aquinas would say intellectual virtues like wisdom, understanding,
Mm-hmm.
help us know what is good.
Mm-hmm.
And the moral virtues, they help us to actually do it.
To put it into action.
Yes.
But what about people who are just naturally more virtuous?
Interesting. Well, Aquinas wouldn't say that virtue is something you're born with.
He sees it as a habit, something you develop through practice.
So like a muscle.
Exactly. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
So we're not just stuck with whatever we're born with.
Nope.
We can actually cultivate virtue.
Yeah.
I like that.
It's empowering, isn't it?
It is. But let's be honest, sometimes doing the right thing.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It is hard. And that's where grace comes in. Aquinas is adamant that we can't achieve true goodness on our own.
We need help.
We need help.
Okay.
We need God's grace, his divine assistance to help us along the way.
It's like we're trying to climb this mountain,
Mm.
but we need God to give us a boost up.
I love that analogy.
Right?
Grace empowers us to make those tough choices.
To overcome our weaknesses.
Yes. And move closer to God.
And speaking of moving closer to God, that leads us to what Aquinas sees as our ultimate goal. Beatitude.
Ah, beatitude.
Yeah. Which sounds like just a fancy word for happiness. But I get the sense it's something way deeper.
You're right. It's not just about feeling good or being content.
Aquinas describes it as a state of supreme and everlasting happiness, a complete fulfillment of our desires.
So it's like reaching the peak of that mountain we were talking about,
Yes,
that summit,
where we find true joy.
lasting joy.
And for Aquinas, that summit is found in union with God.
Okay, that's a pretty lofty goal.
It is.
But if we need grace to even achieve basic virtue,
Yeah,
sounds like beatitude is going to require a whole lot of divine help.
it does.
So we can't just earn our way there.
It's not about racking up good deeds, no. It's about surrendering to God's will and allowing his grace to transform us.
So it's a gift.
It's a gift.
That's radical.
It is radical,
Right.
but it's also incredibly hopeful. It means even though we mess up, we're flawed,
Mm-hmm.
we can still achieve this incredible state of union with God.
I have a question, though.
Yeah.
If beatitude's all about union with God,
Hmm.
do we lose our individuality? Do we just dissolve into God somehow?
That's a great question, and one that Aquinas addresses. He says that yes, we participate in God's being, but we don't cease to exist as individuals.
Okay.
In fact, he says our individual identities are actually perfected in that union.
So it's not about becoming absorbed into something.
No,
It's about our individual selves being fulfilled
Yes.
in relationship with God.
He uses a really helpful analogy. He talks about a burning ember placed next to a fire.
Okay.
The ember doesn't stop being an ember,
Right.
but its heat and light are intensified by the fire.
So our individuality is enhanced, not diminished,
Exactly.
by our connection with God.
That's beautiful.
It is. Makes beatitude sound both intimate and expansive
It's both.
at the same time.
And for Aquinas, this union with God isn't just something that happens after we die.
Oh, okay.
He believes we can experience these glimpses of it
Here and now.
here and now
Wow.
through prayer, contemplation, acts of love.
It's a relationship that we cultivate in this life.
Yes, and it continues into eternity.
Man, this has given me a lot to think about. Aquinas' whole vision of human nature,
A lot.
our capacity for good and evil,
The role of virtue, grace, this idea of beatitude.
it's complex.
It is, but incredibly inspiring too.
I agree. And what's remarkable about Aquinas is how he weaves together philosophy and theology,
Yeah.
reason and faith,
To create this whole
to
picture.
create this tapestry of human experience.
We've covered a lot, but I feel like there's still so much more to explore in Aquinas' work.
Oh, absolutely. We've just scratched the surface. What are some other things he gets into that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, he goes deep on questions of law and justice,
Okay.
sin and redemption. He talks about all sorts of virtues and vices, even practical things like how should we govern ourselves? How should we interact with each other?
So Aquinas really was trying to provide a guide for living a good and meaningful life, everything from those theological mysteries to the everyday stuff.
I think that's a great way to put it. He wanted to show how faith and reason could work together to help us understand ourselves, the world, and God.
Before we wrap up, can we go back to grace for a minute? You mentioned we need God's grace to be truly good, to reach beatitude.
Right.
But for someone who's skeptical about divine intervention, how would Aquinas explain how it actually works? Like, does God just zap us with goodness?
That's something he spends a lot of time on.
Yeah.
It gets pretty deep theologically, but the simple way to put it is that Aquinas sees grace as a kind of participation in God's being.
Okay.
It's not about God forcing goodness on us.
Okay.
It's about him giving us the power to choose good.
So it's more like grace gives us the strength
Mm.
to see the good and then act on it.
A good way to think about it.
But doesn't that undermine free will?
Yeah.
If God's the one making us good.
That's a common objection.
Yeah.
But Aquinas says that grace doesn't override our free will.
Okay.
It works with our free will.
Okay.
God offers us grace.
Yeah.
But we have to accept it and cooperate with it.
So it's like God's offering a hand.
Yes.
We have to reach out and take it.
It's a partnership.
We bring our free will.
Yes.
God brings the grace.
In together.
We work toward goodness.
Exactly.
But how do we know if we're even receiving grace? Are there, like, signs?
Well, Aquinas would say one of the key signs is that desire for good,
Okay.
a longing for God, a willingness to do what's right, even when it's tough.
So it's not like a feeling necessarily.
Yeah.
It's more about seeing a change in our actions, our thoughts.
It's about transformation.
A movement toward virtue, a deeper connection with God.
You got it.
Wow, this has been a really rich conversation. We've only scratched the surface of Aquinas,
Yeah, he's a lot.
but I think we've uncovered some important insights here.
I agree.
It's amazing how relevant his ideas still feel today.
It is.
You know, even though he was writing centuries ago,
Mm.
we're still dealing with the same questions about good and evil, free will, the meaning of life.
He offers a perspective that's grounded in both reason and faith. That's not always easy to find.
Absolutely.
And I think that's why he continues to speak to people across the century.
Yeah, he speaks to our heads and our hearts. Before we move on, is there anything else about grace that we should touch on? It seems like such a core concept for Aquinas.
That's a great point. I think it's important to emphasize that for Aquinas, grace isn't just about personal salvation.
So it's bigger than just me becoming a better person.
It has a social dimension, too.
Okay.
It's about contributing to a better world.
So it affects how we interact with others.
Exactly. Aquinas believed that grace empowers us to love our neighbor,
Mhm.
to act justly, to work for the common good.
So it's not just about our relationship with God,
Right.
but how that relationship then spills over into the world.
It inspires us to create a more just and compassionate society.
It's a powerful idea, especially with all the challenges we face today.
It is. We need to come together and work for that common good,
Our faith should be something that motivates us to act.
to make a difference in the world.
Beautiful. Aquinas would agree, I think. Well, on that note, let's take a quick break and come back for part 3, where we'll delve into some of the other fascinating topics Aquinas explores, like his views on law, justice, and what makes for a truly good society. All right, we're back. So we spent a good amount of time with Aquinas on God, creation, human nature, even angels.
Yeah, we covered some dense territory. Still just scratching the surface of the Summa, though.
It's amazing, isn't it? This one book.
Aquinas was aiming for a pretty comprehensive system of theology.
He wasn't afraid of the big questions.
No, he seemed to embrace them. Law, justice, sin, redemption, the whole range of virtues and vices. He even gets into practical things like, how we govern, how we relate to each other.
It's like he was trying to write a guidebook for living a good life, based on both faith and reason.
I think that's a great way to put it, showing how those two could work together.
So speaking of, you mentioned law and justice earlier. I know Aquinas is famous for his concept of natural law. What's that all about?
Natural law, for Aquinas, it's this inherent order in creation, reflecting God's eternal law. And it's accessible to human reason. You don't need divine revelation to understand it.
So someone who's never read the Bible, never studied theology.
They can still have a sense of right and wrong.
Because it's written on our hearts, you're saying?
In a way, yes. Part of our nature.
What are some examples of natural law?
Well, the most basic principle is do good and avoid evil.
Okay, that's pretty straightforward.
From there, you get other precepts.
Yeah.
Preserving life, procreating, seeking knowledge, living in society.
Those seem pretty universal.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
They go beyond cultural differences.
Okay, but if it's based on reason, and everyone has reason, why is there so much disagreement about right and wrong?
Because even though we all have reason, Aquinas acknowledges we make mistakes.
Right.
Our passions cloud our judgment. Cultural bias is all of that.
So it's not a foolproof system.
More of a starting point.
Right.
A framework for ethical decisions. We have to use our reason, our conscience.
Okay, so that's natural law, but you also have divine law.
Right.
What's the difference there?
Divine law is what's revealed by God through scripture, tradition.
Okay.
Builds on natural law, gives us that fuller understanding.
So natural law is like the basic instructions. Divine law is the deluxe version.
Nice analogy. And then you've got human law.
Right. Where does that fit in?
For Aquinas, human law is derived from natural law. It's how we apply those principles to our specific societies.
So traffic laws, taxes, the justice system.
All trying to uphold natural law, yes.
But it has to be just human law.
Exactly. Aquinas is clear on that. It can't contradict natural or divine law.
If it does, what then?
Well, he says we have a moral obligation to disobey unjust laws.
Wow, that's powerful. Makes me think of the civil rights movement, resisting those Jim Crow laws.
You're right on track there. Aquinas believed our conscience is bound to God's law, not to whatever human rulers might decide.
So it's up to us to discern right from wrong.
A big responsibility.
Even if the law is messed up.
That's what Aquinas believed. We have that capacity, and we're answerable to God for our choices.
Okay, so that's law. What about justice? How does that fit in?
Justice, for Aquinas, it's about giving each person their due.
Okay.
Right, relationships, both between people and in society as a whole.
So it's not just punishment?
No.
It's about everyone having the opportunity to flourish.
Creating that fair society.
Easier said than done, I'd say.
It is an ongoing struggle.
But Aquinas had ideas about how to achieve it, right?
Well, he said it starts with individual virtue.
Okay.
Each of us striving to live justly.
But that's not enough.
No, you also need just laws.
And institutions that are fair.
That protect everyone's rights. It's both
virtuous people and a just system.
And grace plays a role in both, Aquinas would say.
It's amazing how he brings it back to that.
Grace empowers us to live justly.
And to create that just world.
He really connects those dots, from big theological ideas to everyday living.
It's not just theory, it's about action.
That's one of the things that makes him so relevant, I think.
Before we finish up, I want to circle back to this whole question of what it means to live a good life. Aquinas talks about beatitude, that union with God, that brings perfect happiness. But for most of us, we're still just trying to get through the day.
Right, dealing with work, relationships, all the struggles.
So how do we make these ideas practical?
I think Aquinas would say striving for the good life isn't about some far-off destination.
Okay.
It's about making those choices day by day that move us in the right direction.
So cultivating those virtues.
Yes. Justice, prudence, temperance, fortitude, seeking truth, loving goodness, acting with compassion.
It's not about becoming a saint overnight.
No,
It's about those small steps.
becoming better, little by little.
Aquinas believed that even those small acts matter.
The kindness, honesty, self-control.
They shape who we are.
It's not about one grand gesture. It's those daily choices.
And we don't have to do it alone.
Grace is there.
To guide us.
Strengthen us, inspire us.
Well, this deep dive has been challenging.
It is dense stuff.
What? But so rewarding. Aquinas offers a way of thinking that really integrates everything.
Faith and reason, ethics and spirituality. How to be good people and build a good society.
It's complex, but it points towards something really beautiful.
Human flourishing. Something that's both inspiring and possible.
So, to all our listeners out there,
Yeah.
whether you're already familiar with Aquinas
Mm-hmm.
or just looking for some wisdom to guide you,
Keep exploring
keep asking those big questions.
and seeking truth.
Because, as Aquinas reminds us, seeking truth is ultimately about seeking God.
And in that search
We find the meaning and purpose.
that our hearts are longing for.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time as we explore another fascinating topic, delving into the depths of human knowledge and experience.